Hello, politicos. Let's talk the president and the legislative branch. Now, two things right from the very, very start, okay? Two things we need to get started right from the beginning. First of all, Congress is rubbish. Congress is designed not to pass legislation. So at the very, very best of times, Congress would struggle, with apologies to John Green, to pass the Pour Water on Congress Act, even as the flames went up to destroy it. So first things first, Congress finds it very, very difficult to pass legislation. Second point, the president cannot persuade Congress to do anything. The Congress will do what it wants to do. The president is separate from the legislative branch. That is the separation of powers. This is a situation entirely different from the UK, and consequently it's very, very difficult for us to get our head around. Imagine Cameron going to Parliament and saying, will you please do this? And not only will Parliament not do it, they won't even let him in the House. In fact, he can't do it in the UK because we've got that fused executive-legislative relationship, which makes everything such a bloody mess. Anyway, in the United States, it's much more clear-cut. The president lives on Pennsylvania Avenue, and at the other end you've got Congress, and they're just not allowed to mix. The president, Obama, had to leave his seat in order to move across to Pennsylvania Avenue, as did Joe Biden when he picked up his role as VP. So it's a very, very different situation. Now, the interesting thing is that the Constitution has lots to say about the beginning and the end. Or rather, it doesn't have much to say. It only has a few words to say, which makes it allegedly quite straightforward. This, on the other hand, the middle is just a huge black hole into which a vast amount of energy, emotion, and political capital gets poured. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. But remember, when we're talking about the president and the legislative process, these two bits here, we can look to the Constitution, and this bit is just a mess. Okay, good. Hope we got that sorted. No, so as I said, the president is on the outside looking in. He is not part of the legislature. That's the legislature there, and this is the view from Pennsylvania Avenue. And when the president looks from from Pennsylvania Avenue, that is the White House, towards Capitol Hill, normally what he sees is a sea of red lights. Congress is just not going to do whatever he wants them to do. Occasionally, he gets green lights. And we're going to look at the difference between these two scenarios, why sometimes Congress is prepared to play ball, why most of the times Congress just goes meh. And that's it. And if you can get your head around that, then everything else is straightforward. This is a surprisingly short presentation, hopefully. But the real work is going to come after this when we start to look at various case studies. So, legislation. As I said, the president has a role at the start, and that's what the Constitution says. That's all the Constitution says. That's it. He shall from time to time give to Congress, hey, you can read. Now, what that means is he can propose legislation, and normally that happens in one of two ways. The federal budget and the State of the Union address. Now, the federal budget goes straight to Congress, so that just goes straight into their inbox, and they will then debate it. However, the State of the Union address, on the other hand, will outline all sorts of plans and schemes, but Obama himself, or the president himself, cannot introduce them. He needs a member of Congress, and remember, the president is not a member of Congress. He's not allowed in that club. He needs a member of Congress to sponsor that bill and to introduce it on the president's behalf. So in the case of Obamacare, Obama floated the idea in his State of the Union address, but he needed a different congressman to introduce it, and again, we'll look at that in much more detail in due course. At the end of the process, the Constitution kicks in again. Every bill which shall have passed, well, again, you can read it. Now, what that means is before any legislation can become, any bill, can become law, the president needs to sign it. Now, inevitably, it's not quite as complicated as I put there, and there are a number of different options. But the key point is that no bill, technically, can become law without the president's assent. Okay, well, let's have a look at those in a bit more detail. So at the beginning, we've got the State of the Union address, which is this legislative agenda, and the president will ask specific lawmakers to sponsor bills and lobby other members for passage. And members of the executive, other members of the executive, and indeed the VP and the exop will lobby for support within Congress. And to a certain extent, this is one major role that Cabinet has. Now, one of the real things that Cabinet is there for is to liaise with, and that says Cabinet. One of the principal roles of Cabinet is going to be to liaise with the Congress, which is a key point of their selection policy. I could have explained that better. Maybe I will in the next one. Anyway, the federal budget, as I said, goes straight to committee. But again, this is detail that's not particularly important. What is important is this bit. It's nursing the legislation through. Once that bill has been introduced, what can the president do to get it through? And the short answer is not very much. It depends on his leverage. It depends upon his political capital. He can pull party strings. And again, he's just really playing party games here. There's a lot of emotional blackmail going on. And those of you who've seen House of Cards will have seen this play out in a fictional context, but nevertheless, it's relatively accurate. There's a lot of bartering going on. He can handle the negotiations between different congressional groups. He can play the honest broker between different committees if he has the links with them. And again, we're going to look at how this works in practice when we come to look at Obamacare. It tells us everything we really need to know about the legislative office. The legislative process and the role of the president. And one of the key things there is the allure of office. People still do get a bit starstruck by the president. And of course, the fact that he can call upon a national mandate doesn't do him any harm at all. And, you know, rides in Air Force One and invites into the White House still have the ability to impress senators from Buttscotville, Kentucky. Patronage is another one. There are a few places that it may be available, but this is very, very important. The president's ability to offer offices and interesting roles is actually surprisingly limited. It's really quite restricted. And again, we'll look at that when we look at patronage and the role of exop and cabinet in particular. Momentum is perhaps the most important thing that a president's got going for him. This will be determined largely by where he is on the presidential timescale. Has he just been elected or is he in his final days? And that will have a huge amount of impact on the extent to which the president can twist thumbs when it comes to Capitol Hill. So, as I mentioned there, there are special conditions that apply. The first of those is the 100 days. Now, don't ask me why it's 100 days. It just seems to have settled at 100 days. And this is when his momentum is running beautifully. His political capital is never going to be higher. He's got leverage. Basically, he has now got 100 days. And why is it 100 days? Because the media says it's 100 days. He's got 100 days to try to ram through as much stuff as he possibly can. And when we look at Bush, we can see there were certain things that got through, tax cuts and No Child Left Behind. And Obama managed to get through his American Recovery Reinvestment Act and his S-chip reauthorization. What do they mean? Oh, gosh, they're very complicated. But really, it doesn't matter. What matters is that this is the 100 days where he has to get busy and try to get all of that stuff going through. And again, if we look at Obamacare, that was introduced just after his 100 days expired. And it made life incredibly difficult for Obama because he'd just run out of that critical momentum. He was no longer the new, fresh president who was coming in to change things. He was the same guy we had last year. So momentum is very, very important, and it's explained beautifully in these articles. And I'll make sure I tack a copy of them onto the hard copy of the presentation, which is waiting for you in the classroom, although you should have picked it up by now. Okay. That's the beginning. This is the end. This is the concept of the lame duck. And all the things, all the momentum he had, all the leverage he had, all the political capital he had, the traffic lights now are all red. He's looking at a sea of red lights. So he is now essentially a lame duck. But then on the other hand, you could say, well, now he has no need to be nice to Congress. And so you can just say, well, you know what? You guys stuff it. This is what I'm going to do. You can like it or you can lump it. And with Obama, we can definitely see that with his immigration reform in particular and with his Iranian negotiations. These were wildly unpopular with big chunks of Congress. But he just went, yeah, what are you going to do? I'm going. I'm in the last stages. We've had the last batch of midterms. There's really no more damage you can do to us. So while you can argue, well, the standard argument is that a lame duck president is inevitably weaker. The one thing that does go for a lame duck president, or the president in the last days of office, means that he doesn't have to be nice to Congress anymore. And so Obama said, you know what, you guys aren't going to sort out immigration reform, I will. And similarly, Iranian negotiations, you guys don't want to do it because, you know, you're in hog to the Israeli lobby. Yeah, tough. I'm going to negotiate anyway. So it does give him a certain liberty and freedom to do things that might otherwise get mired in congressional rubbish. Now, that's the beginning and the middle. Let's have a quick look at the end. And this is the sense that no bill can become law without presidential approval. At this point, he has four options. One is to sign the bill within 10 days. Now, this is really a bit of a public relations stunt. Most bills don't have this. You'll remember again from your House of Cards, the big signing ceremony. You get children and politicians and the sponsor into the Oval Office, and everyone stands around and they all get a pen and there's photographs. Very, very rarely does this actually happen. The big signing ceremony, it doesn't matter, because in most cases, if he doesn't sign the bill, it becomes law anyway within 10 days. So that's the standard way. The president just goes, yeah, whatever. And then 10 days later, that bill becomes law. However, if the president doesn't like it, he can refuse to sign the law. And of course, this is the veto. Now, as with all things checks and balancing, he can pass the veto. That's your checks and balance. It can be overturned by a supermajority of both houses. So the check is itself checked. But we'll look at the stats on that in a minute, and you'll see that really the veto can be quite a significant weapon. This is the one that everyone remembers, and arguably it's the least important of the lot, but it's kind of interesting. If he refuses to sign the bill, and Congress comes to the end of its term within that 10-day period, so remember, it's got 10 days, okay? 10 days, it becomes law automatically. If Congress goes on holiday before those 10 days are expired, then the bill dies. Now, this cannot be overturned, and that is significant. So this is the pocket veto, okay? And it cannot be overturned because Congress has gone on holiday and they have to start again. What this generally means is that relationships between the president and Congress have broken down to such a nadir that Congress can't even get its legislation to the president on time. It's a symbol that things have gone very, very wrong. It doesn't happen very often anymore because Congress is not so stupid. If they can manage to get a bill through, they don't want it subject to the pocket veto, so they will get it to the president within 10 days. If they don't, it's a monumental error. But Congress, woefully inept as it is, tends not to do that anymore. Okay, here are our case studies. Bush, 11 vetoes, 1 pocket veto, 4 reversals in Congress. Note that he didn't use the veto at all in the first term. But then in the second term, he had huge, proportionally, that is the highest of recent time, that 36% overturn recent time. Congress and Bush didn't get on. That second term, everybody finally realized that Bush was a weapons-grade moron. Perhaps more significant, they realized that he was electoral plutonium. Obama, on the other hand, hasn't used the veto much. Largely because Congress hasn't passed much legislation, so there hasn't been much call for him to use the veto. There have been a few, however, and if you have those examples up your sleeve, it won't do you any harm at all. But powerful as this weapon is, what it generally shows is that the relationship with Congress has just fundamentally broken down. So while the veto, yes, it is powerful, it's more symbolic in that it means that Congress and President are really in a dysfunctional relationship. Presidential power, domestic power, as we've seen, he's got very, very limited leverage over Congress, limited federal power. I'm not quite sure why this is going on because really I'm stopped here. This is for the future, and I look forward to discussing that with you there. But first, we're going to have a look at Obamacare, and now you're probably not going to like it because it's quite confusing, but it's very, very interesting indeed. See you then.